Start recording. So we were just utilizing React lifecycle methods on class components. Now, as React moves towards to a more functional-based application, we still need to do something. There needs to be a replacement for those lifecycle methods to execute certain operations at certain points in a component's lifecycle. And with the introduction of React hooks, we've already been kind of using one hook in functional components. Which hook have we been using? Use state. So that's one hook. There's another hook called useEffect. Kind of pretty much, yeah, it's just called useEffect. There's a lot of use context, use other. So in here, I've got this useEffect hook. The functional component. I'm gonna just change it to a arrow function. I like that. And we're gonna render stuff on the screen. We're actually gonna make an API request and render some stuff on the screen. Let's see if we can do that. So we need states, so we can render some titles, not data transfer item titles, which is gonna be
okay. That's some weird like automation.
Titles, set titles, and equals use state, initial state. Let's assign an empty array. Use state is not defined, so use state. Then
it's called const.
Then in here, we'll set states. So like if titles exist, and then so once titles gets returned, so we're gonna have to grab data from somewhere. So let's write a method to make an API request. Call it get or const. Oh, I'll deal with this later. Const get photos API, and I'm going to make it an async method. And I'm going to use, what is that? JSON placeholder. These are photos. Cool. So here is a URL that we can go to and grab a bunch of JSON data. I think there's like 5,000 of them. So in here, how do I make an API request using async await? Yeah, use response, await, fetch, and grab that URL. And in new site, we were doing all these API requests in a separate file, which is best practices. But for all intents and purposes, let's just do it in a function, and then let data equals response dot data dot JSON, and then return data. Oh no, we want to know what? We want to set title. Set titles. Titles. And then just data. So once I'm going to just copy over the code real quick. This is just stuff you should be familiar with. Like once we have titles, we can loop through them and push them into array and then render that array. So show titles. So once there's stuff in the titles, we're going to loop through it, grab some information from it. So title, we grab the title thumbnail URL and the title. Oh no. I cannot read property map of undefined since titles does not exist yet. So we can do titles and show titles. Div. We need a surrounding div. Right. Nice. Just set this. There we go. So we have this just helper function that maps through the array and is going to render something on the screen. But now we actually have to make this API request. So there's this, I'm going to format. There's this hook called useEffect. So useEffect takes a callback function and then runs something. So we can do set. So it takes a callback, and then we can execute something. What do we want to execute in here? Just console log useEffect. Oh. So it calls it once. So in here, let's actually call get photos API. Oh no. Not read property map, undefined. Titles. Oh, so show titles has to take in titles. Uh-oh. Titles got mad. So useEffect is ran. The type error titles.map, not a function. Let's create another thing that executes what we want to happen here. So useEffect is ran, get photo, API, sets the state, data. I'm going to say like make API. I want to see if this make API. Set make API. False. And down here, I'm going to create a button. Make API request. And in here, I'm going to create a function that actually sets that to true. So what if so I'm getting, so this works. So useEffect is coming in here, but it's not doing anything. But when I call get photos API, sets the titles, comes in here, because it's moving too fast.
You only want to do it once, right?
Right.
So not line 11 after the square bracket.
Yeah. So it's because we'll see. Like I want to see this thing because it's going to keep on executing, right? But yeah, I want to see that actually like keep executing. So I'm just going to create a make API, set it to false, and create a button. I'm going to change that, and then I'm going to do some conditional statements in here, whether or not to actually make an API request. So get titles, get titles, set make API to true. And get title. I'm going to come in here, click, get title.
Click this video quickie again.
Okay, it says too many re-renders, React limit number of re-renders, prevents an infinite loop. So the reason why is because useEffect is constantly updating. I just have to. So I can do like if make API is true, or get photos. See if this works. Nope, same thing. Too many renders. I see it like useEffect. I wanted to see useEffect just keep on being rendered. Like, I wanted that count number to go up, but it's not working. It's not executing. So useEffect takes two parameters, a callback function in which you're going to perform some logic, and then, so anytime your component renders or anything, the useEffect method is called, and we can determine whether or not we want useEffect to update or to execute based off of any type of state change. So right now it's just constantly like run. But we only want it to run when we want make API request to change. So when it renders, comes into useEffect, make API change state, change the value. No, so it's not going to run this part. Still going. Oh, come on. Make API, false. Console log, make API. Code, I know that works. And we'll walk through it. My apologies. There we go. So let's just walk through. I've got some notes. So I've got set state of titles, set titles, where it's initially null. I've got make API request, which is Boolean value, which is initially set to null. Let's skip down to the user, or after here, we have a function called get titles, which sets make API to true. We have this get photos API, which actually gets the photos and returns set titles to the data, an array of photos. Then we have the show titles that takes in an array of titles that's already at state. We can console log those titles, maps through it. Come down here, this is where that initial titles exists. And then it's going to execute this function, which is going to render the titles. There's a button that says get the titles, which calls this get titles, which sets make API to true. Then in our useEffect, accepts a callback. So if make API request is true, run the get photos API, which sets the state, and only run it. So we'll only execute again if make API variable. So there's currently no titles. So let's look down here. If titles exists, say like finish loading, otherwise say no titles. So if I click this get titles, it's gonna come up here to get titles, sets this make API to true. So now this is no longer false, it's true. useEffect runs because it's kind of pretty much almost, it seems like it's constantly running. Comes into here, sees whether or not this make API state is changed. If it changes, then come into here. So if make API is true, so this is basic if statement. If it's true, run the get photos, then sets titles to the response that we get back. So if I click this, there it is. We're getting a bunch of titles. Then it finished loading. I would get up 5,000. Now, if I type titles, see, get titles, actually, I'm not actually running. So I'm clicking get titles, it's setting, let's actually, console log, make API. So states change, make titles is true, but I'm not actually updating the state. It comes into useEffect. The titles change yet? No, because I'm not actually making that API request. This titles actually hasn't changed yet. Any questions about the useEffect? So again, useEffect. I just want to get rid of that. See what happens. Log useEffect. So useEffect comes in there. So still getting a bunch of stuff. There we go. So useEffect ran again. See how it's continuing running?
Oh man. Didn't it stop you before that? Yeah. Okay, so just
Oh no, yeah, it was like so. It was running so fast, so it reached like a maximum call stack, and then so it's just continuing to execute. So that's where that kind of like infinite loop is. So that's why. And if you want to stop it, you can. I think you can just do that. Let's get titles. True. So again, it's actually not changing. There's no state. So if you just want it to execute once, you just kind of put like an empty thing, empty array. But make API. So we useEffect comes into here. Make a API is false, so it doesn't get to get API. I click it, they change the state. It's checking to see if the state ever changes. If it does, it's run it again. So use effect is like takes, you read in the lecture notes, essentially combines like component did mount, component will update, component will unmount. All like combines them all. And this is where you should be making your API requests and performing logic. Similar to component did mount. Any questions?
So my only question is, since we can't use lifecycle components, but the hooks provide kind of an alternative that conceptually works the same, except that you don't use specific lifecycle, like manual lifecycle methods, right? It's almost done behind the scenes. It was like a conceptual, kind of like being system effect, and this is a state, right? You know what I mean? It's like it does the same thing. You're not actually accessing like render or component mount or state change.
Right. Yeah. I think.
It almost feels less powerful that way, in that you're not like. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can customize it more. Are we using use effect and use state pretty much? I mean, like, are those the ones we'll use 80% of the time?
Not necessarily. So again, as React moves forward in your job, you'll probably start seeing use effect. Where you're seeing legacy code, and some people don't want to change using hooks for various reasons. Whether testing libraries aren't up to date, that account for the changes. You'll see component did mount a lot.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just within functional though, are those the ones that we use the most?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So use state, use effect within primarily or only in functional components is what you'll be using most. As you get more complex apps, you'll see like use context, which is a whole nother thing that we're not going to get into. Yeah. So there's a bunch of React hooks out there. You can even customize, create your own hooks to operate in a certain way, but use state, use effect as an alternative. Use effect as an alternative to component did mount, component did update, or component will update. Now, as you are building your apps, you have the freedom to choose which one you want to do. As we mentioned earlier, as we start a new site, we'd like you to go do it one way and then see if you can refactor it, do it the opposite way, just to get familiar and comfortable. As opposed to both class components, functional components, lifecycle methods, and then the use effect. But it's up to you. Primarily, curriculum still use component did mount and lifecycle methods, but we'll go through it. All right. Nobody has more questions. I'm going to stop.